In this video, I'll be showing you how we can establish communication between the Arduino board and TouchDesigner. So here, what I have are two input devices already set up. And on the left is the result of that communication within TouchDesigner. So these are showing you the values of these inputs as chops. So if I start to interact with my button here on the board, you'll see that top channel, chan 1, is flipping between 0 and 1. The potentiometer I have here on the left, that is the bottom channel, or chan 2. So as I twist the knob or turn the knob, you'll see that influences that value on the bottom. Okay, so this is the extent as to what I'll be showing you to do, what I'll be showing you to do to get this to function properly. And as an example here, I have on the left just a simple circle that I've mapped these values from the button and potentiometer to change. So for the button, if I press this button once, it's going to toggle that polygon parameter, so it becomes a triangle. So I can toggle this back and forth. When I interact with my potentiometer, I can also rotate that shape. I won't be showing you how to get this connected and set up because that will be up to you. That is part of the challenge of the project. I will get you as far as letting you see the values in TouchDesigner, but what you do with those values is going to be completely up to you. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into this tutorial. So we'll be starting off with the button. And first I want to just set up the breadboard. I'm going to patch the button up so that we can use it and read the inputs to the Arduino first. So I have a pretty fancy looking button here, but this is going to work with any kind of button you have. The ones in our kits are just perfectly fine. So with the buttons, I want to make sure that one end is connected to the ground rail. This could be any end. I have it on the right side, the right pin of the button. Also, when you connect it, make sure that it is bridging the gap in the middle. Then the left pin, I've connected that to pin D12 on the Arduino board. Okay, so that's pin D12. I'm looking at it from the breadboard perspective. It is the first pin on the upper left side of my board. So that's the button setup, and that is all we need to do with the hardware. Step 2 is the Arduino code. So I'm going to be going through my steps in order to get my button recognized in my sketch. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I need to make some new lines before setup, and I'm going to set the pin value to a variable. So I'm going to say const int, and I'm going to call this button pin with a capital P equals 12. Below that, I'm going to create an regular old int, an integer, and this one's going to be called button val with a capital V. I don't need to assign a value to this. By default, this is going to be 0. Moving into setup, the most important thing we're going to need to keep in mind is that the way that Arduino is going to talk to TouchDesigner is through the serial port. So in setup, we have to make sure we start with our serial.begin code and specify this as 9600. Below that, we need to then set up the pin mode for my button. So we need to tell Arduino how are we going to read the data, or are we going to output data? So because this is a button, it is an input. My pin mode, I need to target my button pin, and I'm going to be setting that to input underscore pull up. And if you remember, the input pull up is a special value that tells Arduino to use the built-in resistor for my button. And that is all we're going to need to do in setup. The last thing actually is we need to add a very small delay here just to ensure the serial port has time to open. So I'm going to add a delay of about 10, and this is 10 milliseconds. Moving on into the loop function. In loop, I first want to read the input of the button. So to do that, I'm going to first call the variable I created up top to store that value, so button val. So I'm going to say button val equals, and then the function here to read the input, I'm going to say digital read. And then the value inside of it is going to be the value from the actual pin. So it's button pin. Below that, this is going to be also an important step, is that I need to print this to the serial monitor. So I'm going to say serial.println, and then I'm going to pass in the updated value of button val. After that, I'm going to add a very small delay of 15 milliseconds here. Great, let's go ahead and save this sketch. I'm going to call this ARD-touch, Arduino TouchDesigner. And that should save and reload. Perfect. So next, let's go ahead and test this out. I want to connect my Arduino to my computer. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm going to verify it is connected correctly. I should see the bottom right corner, Arduino Nano on COM something. Also, this text in this drop-down menu should be bolded. If not, make sure you go ahead and select the correct COM port. And let's just go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and verify my code, verify my sketch, make sure there are no errors, and I'm going to go ahead and upload this. Once it has uploaded successfully, let's go ahead and open up the serial monitor. So I'm going to click on the serial monitor icon towards the top right corner. And I should now see my values. My settings are, I tweak these settings of the actual monitor. I tend to turn the auto scroll off, but I just turned it on again just so we can see those values are being updated. So just to verify, by default, the default state, the default value of the button we see is 1. And when I hold the button down, that should turn to 0. So great, just verifying that this is reading the values correctly and properly. It's going to be important that this step, everything checks out here before we move on into TouchDesigner. So if this is not working out just yet, just double check all your connections, double check your code, double check your serial port, make sure everything is functioning properly, and then we can move on. So this is going to be important, this next thing that we do here. We're going to need to make sure that the serial monitor is closed. Okay, so if it is open, just go ahead and hit this X to close that back up. That's going to be a very important step, that your serial monitor is closed. Once that is the case, let's go ahead and launch TouchDesigner. So in TouchDesigner, there's going to be one key operator that we're going to be using, and this is part of a family we have not discussed in class. So I'm going to open up my Create dialog, and let's head over to the DAT tab, or the DAT tab. And in that, we're going to search for serial. And this is the same exact serial as the Arduino serial. So let's go ahead and serial. Let's go ahead and add this to our network here. So click on the actual serial. We're not going to be too concerned about what's happening down here in this text. I'm going to click on the main serial operator and open up those parameters. And there are a couple things to double check. The first is we want to make sure that the baud rate matches the value that we typed in on Arduino IDE. So this is the rate at which it is reading the information. So make sure this says 9600. It should by default. Just verify, double check that. The second next is the port. So this should match the port number that your Arduino is connected to. So this may differ if you're on Windows versus Mac. So what you're going to do is just go ahead and look at your Arduino IDE, and you want to make sure that you know this port number that is displayed below the actual name of the Arduino. So for me, this is COM13. Yours may say a different number. If you're on Mac, it may have a sort of like file path. So just take note of that. And in TouchDesigner, for the port, we can click on this drop-down arrow and then select that matching port number. And once you make that change, you should see this DAT operator populate with values. And if I go ahead and click on my button, you'll see those values should be changing in accordance with your inputs. If for some reason you do not see this, then a couple steps I recommend is first to reconnect your USB to your Arduino. So just disconnect it, wait a couple seconds, and connect it back. And that should potentially reestablish that connection. Another thing to check is to make sure that in the Arduino IDE, that serial monitor is closed. Okay, the monitor should be closed. And that should resolve this issue. And the reason why we want that monitor to be closed in Arduino is because at this point, Arduino and TouchDesigner are competing to access this serial port. And they're competing to get the data from that port. So if you are looking at the port in Arduino, or you're looking at the monitor, you're seeing the values update in Arduino, then that means TouchDesigner does not have access to it and is being blocked. So that's why it's important to close that up. If for some reason it's still not showing up, you've closed the serial monitor, you've reconnected your Arduino, then I would recommend trying to verify and re-upload your code to the board again. And that should do the trick. But from this point, once you have this serial DAT open in TouchDesigner, every time you make a change to the Arduino IDE, the Arduino code, and you want to re-upload it, you'll first have to turn the active parameter of the serial DAT to off. We want to shut off that connection before we make any changes to it. And once those changes are successfully uploaded, then you can go ahead and turn the active state back on. And then it should update that. Okay, so it's going to get a little bit tricky. So just be patient, try these different techniques out. And if none of those work, then you can always ask me for of any questions or with any help troubleshooting what might be going on. So at this point, let's say we're good to go. Our button is being read in to this serial DAT. And now we can continue to set this up so we can use this as a chop, as a value, as a usable value in TouchDesigner. So after serial, we're going to go ahead and right-click on this output. I'm going to search for a select DAT. I select DAT chop, select DAT operator. And for the select, the issue right now is that we have 10 different rows of values that are displaying at once. It is updating successfully, but that is way too many lines, right? I only need one value at a time. So for the select parameters, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the select rows parameter to by index, because each of these lines is considered an index. So select rows by index. The next thing is I want to just limit these rows to only one. So for the start row index, I'm going to push this all the way up to 10. So start row index should equal 10, and then I should only see that top row. So now when I press my button, I should see that toggle between 1 and 0. So the last step here, or not the last step, but the next step to get this to a chop is we need to first right-click on this select DAT and go to the chop tab, and you're going to select the DAT2 chop. And this converts that value into a chop. So with the DAT2 chop, let's go ahead and open up those parameters. And towards the bottom, you'll see 3 parameters: output, first row, and first column. So output, we need to change this to channel per value. And then the next thing, make sure first row is set to values, and then make sure first column is also set to values. So now we should see that button value being represented as a chop. On the left side, I have the value of the button, and on the right side is the name of the channel. In this case, it is just channel 1. And again, making sure this is all working correctly. If I hold my button down, that value goes down to 0. If I release it, it is up to 1. And that's really the minimum of what you need. The next few steps here, we're just going to be cleaning up, organizing this chop here. So after my DAT2, I'm going to go ahead and add a select chop. And again, we are now in the chops menu, so make sure you are using the select chop. And for here, open up those parameters, and I just want to rename this channel so that it is reflective of what the input is. So channel names, I'm going to go ahead and select the chan1. Rename from, I'm going to select the old name, chan1. Rename to, I'm going to type in a brand new name. I'm going to call this button. Great. And if you notice, this is actually inverted. So if I'm not pressing the button, in its default state, it is a value of 1. And when it is actually pressed down, it's a value of 0. So we can do some work to just invert this value so that it is more typical. So after select 2, I'm going to add a logic chop. Logic. And with logic, I'm going to connect select into there. And logic here, I'm going to be looking at the channel pre-op parameter. And I'm going to change this to invert. And now when I press my button, well, right now my button is not pressed. This is the default state here. But when I do press my button, you'll see now it's inverted. So when I hold it down, it's outputting a value of 1, which is exactly, it's typical of what you would use a button for. Something is happening, something is turned on when the button is pressed, and then when I release it, it's turned off. And then last thing here, just additional option for you. If you want to have the value hold when you press the button, then what we could do here is we can add another logic. So I'm going to add another logic chop. And this time for the channel pre-op, I'm going to select toggle. And so now when I press the button, it's actually just going to toggle the value. So now it's just holding a value of 1 when I press it once. When I press it again, it's going to shut that value off. And from here, the world is your oyster, right? The TouchDesigner capabilities is really up to you as far as how you want to use and where you want to use this button value. The next part of this video, I'm going to be showing you how we can use a more analog type of input, like this potentiometer, to also, once again, just bring this data into TouchDesigner. This potentiometer is going to require a little bit of more work because we'll see that the values tend to be a little bit more sporadic with this knob. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. This is also helpful because you're going to need at least 2 input devices to use with TouchDesigner. So let's go ahead and dive into the next part.